So maybe we can get into this obliquely, since you mentioned at the top Gavin Newsom. What did you think of his speech about what's going on in LA? Depending on your perspective, peaceful protests or riots or violent insurrection?
I mean, I think it's a little bit premature for him to say this is like the moment that we all dreaded, where the heavy foot of the authoritarian leader finally puts its, jackboot on our neck, or whatever version of that he gave. I think we're not quite there yet, actually. But look, he's exploiting this as he should. I mean, for himself politically, as being the moment when he can step forth as the face of the opposition.
So I'm not one to defend Gavin Newsom, and he can defend himself. But is it really fair to say he's exploiting the situation? Isn't it more fair to say Trump is exploiting the situation and he's
Yes.
trying to
Okay.
manage the crisis?
Oh my God, I'm talking to this lawyer, aren't I? Yes. Thank you for cross-examining me, but yes,
Just one
absolutely.
question.
Yes, you're right. Of course, no, he's not exploiting it. He's outraged. He should be outraged. I mean, the National Guard and the Marines have been let loose on his city when he didn't need it or ask for it. So of course he's outraged, and Trump is totally exploiting it. I'm not entirely sure it's working for Trump. I mean, it sort of is, but I think that most people agree that. I mean, you look at the news accounts, and I just don't know what's really happening in LA because I'm not on the ground. It's so frustrating. But you look at what to me looks like a kind of dyspeptic melee going on there. I don't know what you feel about the violence of what's happening. It's very hard to tell. Like, is this really a dangerous protest, or is this kind of essentially a melee that could be dispersed by the LAPD?
I think it's a really great and important and fundamental question in all this. It's hard to know ground truth anymore, but I would think, given the current state of play, that if there were, in fact, really significant acts, and there have been acts of violence, and there have been burning of cars and destruction of property, and I've thought about that I think Democrats get wrong often, to put the political hat on just for a second. But I think if really, really bad and heinous things were going on, we would see them, because there are people who, and I hate to say this and sound cynical also, again, there are people for whom that would be helpful. And to use the word that I think will be the theme of this conversation, they can exploit that imagery. Donald Trump in particular, they still need to persuade lots of people that the extreme action of calling up the National Guard, without the blessing of the governor is a good idea, and that the calling out to lie in waiting of hundreds of Marines is a good idea. And I think if they had that footage in extreme form, they would show it. So the question, is it a garden variety protest where there's some pockets of unacceptable violence that happens, all the time in this country and has for hundreds of years? Or is it something extreme? And by the way, a good benchmark for the hypocrites, which I will call them, but nobody seems to care about hypocrisy anymore. Good benchmark is this conduct more or less violent than the conduct on January 6th?
Well,
Because
this is the thing.
these same guys were in charge. Right?
Exactly right. And they really did, abuse the police. I mean, they wounded, damaged, and assaulted police people on that demonstration. And there they were now. The J6 choir apparently is trying to now get a gig at the Kennedy Center, I heard last night. So maybe they will, but it's grotesque hypocrisy, of course.
But so I'm a lawyer. I don't just play one on TV, and so part of my job in having a public platform is to talk about violations of due process, to talk about the Constitution. That's my job. I'm not a politician. I'm not a political consultant or an ad maker. I don't even play one on TV. So some very important issues that you raise from time to time, and you raised on your piece on Substack, Trump's flashbang fakery. I don't have fully the expertise to analyze, but I think they're important to discuss, because it's okay, I think, for me, that's my job, to talk about the legal aspects. I think this is one question you pose. What's the role of an elected official who, on the Democratic side, is trying to bring the House back and is trying to lead a good opposition against Trump? And you say in this article about Garcia, who's just been charged. If he does turn out to have spent the last 9 years transporting undocumented migrants from Houston to Maryland, rather than minding his own business, etc., then he's an unfortunate poster boy for ICE overreach. And then you say due process, a bedrock of American civil liberties, is also sadly a pointy-headed legal term that just doesn't cut it in today's raucous political playing field. So I'm mildly insulted, but at the pointy-headed
Sorry,
of a
sorry, Preet.
round of a
Yeah.
round head. No, but it's a very interesting question. Do you care to elaborate on that, and then I'll tell you my
Well, I mean,
amateur thoughts.
yes. I mean, listen, I lament it. I can't,
Yeah,
it ought to get people extraordinarily exercised. And there are people who are extraordinarily exercised. But I'm feeling more and more disconsolate, shall we say, about what I'm starting to think of as the big shrug. I mean,
yeah,
what does it get? What does it take to get sort of the American populace in a focused way to say enough? And I just don't think that, as we saw during the impeachment trials of the first term, that people just get engaged by these kind of what they see as sort of notional issues that have nothing to do with what I'm trying to do with, like, earn a living and, educate my kids. They just don't seem to find the visceral attachment, which, is a real shame, because if their sons were, kind of virtually renditioned off the streets and were given no access to lawyers or whatever, I mean, they'd be completely outraged. But unfortunately, it doesn't really land. And one of the things that I've sort of noticed about political life essentially is that you really need an issue that sort of lands with people, that they can actually totally understand and get behind, that everyone sort of in a sports bar, as it were, is going to talk about it. And I just don't think that due process is one of them, even though, and unfortunately, look, I was talking to someone who's in my building, who's a real MAGA guy, who is my sort of touchstone for MAGA. And without any kind of prodding from me, he just said, "Can you believe that the Democrats are wasting their time defending this guy, Garcia, who's like, assaulted his wife and he's been driving migrants across the country? That's why they lost, because they don't care about what Americans are caring about. They're caring about this guy who's a criminal, who's like, so that's what they got.
yeah,
Now, of course, we're watching different media, probably.
yeah.
So, that's what he's probably hearing out of Fox News and Joe Rogan or whatever he's listening to. But it's a real problem, because that is absolutely in his mind. Here we go again. Democrats worrying about the wrong things.
Yeah. So it's very difficult. Again, I'm on the law side, but if I had to think about it politically and rhetorically, there's a few things. First of all, some subset don't care about anything that Donald Trump does. I guarantee you they would care. I guarantee you they would care if a Democratic president decided to render someone on gun charges who was some kind of hero to the NRA without proper evidence and in violation of a court order. They would
Mhm.
lose their fucking minds.
Yeah.
And you know what they'd be saying? They'd be saying due process, due process, due process.
Mhm.
Where's the Constitution? You're trapping the Constitution. So I put aside those people who only care about outcome and only care about what tribe is doing what. On the left, I think there is a lot of outrage, and people do care about due process
Yeah.
and talk about it. I
Yeah.
think everyone should. And then you have sort of the middle, and I think with respect to sort of moderates in the middle, there are a few things. This doesn't fix the problem, the political problem. It doesn't change the mass of people's attention and emphasis and prioritization. But number one, when issues like this arise, politicians from left and right should condemn violence. You should start out every statement you make about these things that are going on that I can see on the television behind my phone is, protest is a tradition in this country, peacefully. It's enshrined in the First Amendment. We're very proud of that, but violence has no place. And millions of people have been liberated by movements of nonviolent, peaceful protest, both in this country and in other countries. And the power of peaceful, nonviolent protest, history teaches, is overwhelmingly significant and consequential. So that's number one. Number two, or that's 1A. 1B is you can't destroy property. That's not speech. You can't threaten people. You can't make people feel unsafe. And you can't minimize people's concerns. So when some people come out, unlike when you and I say garden variety protest with some violence, maybe I was guilty of it a few minutes ago, of violating my own prescription. Take it seriously. Don't minimize it, because some people, rightfully, who live in those neighborhoods, care about it. The second thing is, when there is a putative victim of some overreach or injustice, by the police or by this administration, whether it's Garcia or anyone else, there is no requirement or need, nor is it wise, to lionize and deify that victim. Right? I mean, I think I was not guilty of this, at least. Mr. Garcia, when this first arose, I'm like, I don't know if he's a bad guy. Maybe he's a terrible guy. Maybe he's a gang member. I keep citing to Judge Wilkerson's opinion from the Fourth Circuit. The administration keeps claiming he's a terrorist and is a gang member. Perhaps, perhaps not, but they got to prove it. And so I think this doesn't solve the problem, but I think that the better argument is, look, I have no idea about this guy. If there's a similar situation arises in the future, I don't know. And you know what? I don't care. Because in this country, and you don't use the words due process, you don't use, I'm going to say it again, these pointy-headed legal terms that some of which are found in the pointy-headed Constitution of the United States of America, Ms. Brown, and say it doesn't matter. We don't just take people off the street. I mean, I didn't do that. I wasn't allowed to do that.
I don't think it doesn't matter. I don't think it doesn't matter.
No, but I mean, rhetorically, do you think? I guess the question is for you. Can you talk about I mean, I'm kidding aside. Can you talk about these issues in a way that the ordinary person can understand? Like, that is bad, because you don't want to rip people from their homes and they have no day in court and they get sent to some other prison. It doesn't seem crazy to me that should resonate with everybody who claims to love liberty. No?
I think it should, and it does. I think, unfortunately, it gets overlaid by, today we have a situation which is, it's not just what you say, it's what they say you'll say, right?
Right.
Which is, I think, I remember going through this actually when I had when I was about to publish at the time of the kid who was murdered in Florida, if you remember. And Obama said that could have been me. Remember that case?
Yeah, of course.
And I was going to publish on the cover of Newsweek at the time a picture of Obama in a hoodie, and saying, it could have been me. Trayvon could have been me, right?
Yeah. And
I wasn't sure about publishing it. A lot of people absolutely loved it, as it happened. Tom Wolfe, who was in my office at the time, said how it was the best cover he'd seen recently, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of people loved it. But I asked Skip Gates, Professor Gates from, the Black Studies Institute at Harvard. I said to him, I just want to get your point of view. Like, he said, don't do it, because it's not that the cover's wrong. It's what they will do with the cover. It's what other people are doing. So we now have a situation where there's those two decisions you have to make, not just what you're saying or doing, but what they will make of it. I think that Senator Chris Van Hollen, for instance, I really admired the way that he went to El Salvador. He sought out. He insisted on seeing his constituent, Garcia. He met with him. He brought publicity to his case. I thought it was great. But I also think that in his next re-election campaign, it'll be used against him in a kind of vile, Republican mashup, where they're saying, Chris Van Hollen loves criminal immigrants. And that is the problem that we have now. Now, I don't know quite how you rectify that, except by being extremely careful and clear, in the way that you just were, with what you are saying. And also, as you say, to condemn violence. I spent 4 or 5 months living in LA during COVID. And I really got to know several people, in LA whose stores had been completely vandalized, during those riots that happened after Black Lives Matter. And they were just furious. They felt that nobody cared about them, that nobody took any actions about it. Their jewelry shop, their gyms, their whatever, they were totally smashed. Everything was gone, looted, blah, blah, blah. They were livid. They felt nothing had been done about it. And they despised Newsom and the whole regime for how they'd handled that. So, as you say, you really have to consider that, and it's not funny to have your store, vandalized, and we have to take that serious. But uh, I'm still my problem with this whole case in LA is I just don't know how bad it is, or nor rather, do I know how much of this is being stirred up as well by the presence of all of this military presence that Trump has sent into LA, and if he's going to make a habit of this.
Wait, I'm confused. I thought the I thought the insurrectionists were paid. That's what I thought they were. I mean, part of the problem with all this is anybody can say anything, and it's just automatically believed. A point that I've been thinking about for a long time is, it's not a bad thing for people generally to be skeptical of the mainstream press and the legacy media. We should be skeptical. We should be critical. Um, but it tends to be the case that all the people who are, reflexively critical and skeptical of the so-called legacy press are utterly and completely credulous of everything that comes out of the president's mouth or his henchman's mouth. And that doesn't make a lot of sense. If your general orientation is skepticism, and wanting proof and wanting evidence, then I think that's good and that's smart. And if your guy, through the prism of common sense and evidence and facts and logic, gets it right more than the other people, well, then you believe your guy. But it's reflexive disbelief of what one side says, combined with reflexive um, belief of what the other person. So reflexive belief and reflexive disbelief, as opposed to overall general skepticism, which would be better for citizens to subscribe to, don't you think?
Well, I do, and I'm not quite sure who's to blame the most. The sort of education system or what's happening in schools. I don't know, or because there seems to be such a kind of lack of sort of civic knowledge amongst people, really these days, or whether it is just going back to this whole question of the media. I mean, unfortunately, I do think that Fox News, the combination of sort of Fox News and Facebook, essentially, have sort of destroyed all of these trust mechanisms, that we had in the past, really. That's part of the problem, as I mentioned with the guy that I talked to, who's this MAGA person in my building. I mean, he's just not looking at the same or listening to the same media that I am. So he just sees it completely differently, and he always will. It has got into his head like a brainworm, you know, that that what Trump says means something. But I also think that, I mean, we have to accept the fact that Trump is just, as I say in the piece, I mean, he is a brilliant producer of his own reality show. I mean, as soon as it starts to kind of jump the shark, as it were, he's on to the next thing. It's like tariffs, were a bore. You know what I'm saying? To most people as a show, right? So tariffs, it's still going on, all that tariff conflict, etc. But it's been booted into the sort of realm of CNBC. And instead, we have flashbang riots in LA. And as soon as Trump feels that air is going out of that balloon, it'll change again, and he'll have some other a red hot issue. Meanwhile, Democrats are left kind of going, and they're sort of still, trying to deal with the last crisis. So that is one of our
Yeah.
problems, I think, on the sort of, I would say, the raging moderate side.
Yeah. Look, a corollary to this, and I know we got to go. We got to let you read those books behind you. Um, there's also this problem. I think it's one people have written. It's more on the left that they're very sort of black or white, and they see Tina Brown. Tina Brown's a good person. She's one of us, and so she's good. Or Preet is good or bad or whatever. And then you do or say something. Maybe even in the Garcia debate, you say, "Yeah, look, he could be a terrible person. He could be a bad guy. He could be a piece of shit." It doesn't matter
Oh,
because we without proof, we don't take anybody out of their home in violation of a court order and send them to a prison in another country. We just don't do that. He could be, the most pious person in the history of the world, or he could be an unconvicted criminal. That's not what we do. And if you said that, rather than persisting in or conforming with the lionization of everyone who's ever wronged by Trump, some people will think, oh, well, she's not our ally anymore. She's not with us anymore. And this idea that there's no one in your personal life who's perfect. That includes your family, that includes me, that includes you. And so why it has to be the case often that political figures that we follow or are asked to vote for or who govern us um, must be purely good all the time and are thrown, the old term cancellation, and are thrown down the ditch if they do something that's a little bit off. When we maintain relationships, I hope we maintain relationships with all sorts of people for long periods of time in our family and in our friendships who sometimes get it wrong and sometimes say stuff that indicates, okay, well, that's an imperfect person, um, including people who vote for Republicans if you're a Democrat. And why we hold on the progressive side, Democrats, why we hold our folks to such an extreme um, set of criteria, I don't know. I think it's a bad thing.
I think it's a very bad thing, but it is, unfortunately, again, the corollary is just the speed and the superficiality of the way people respond. They see a headline, they jump all over it. Now we have a new hero. He's this guy, Garcia. Nobody actually reads anything. I mean, you told me the other night you were, quote, reading the Garcia indictment. And I thought, wow, I was so impressed. The idea that someone would read the indictment, I mean, it doesn't exist.
You know why? You know why?
Why?
Because I enjoy pointy-headed legal terms.
And you're just an indictment nerd. I mean, you just read every indictment.
Well, that's my business. That's my business.
Yeah,
I don't expect other people to read.
But when you read the indictment, how did you feel about Garcia? What do you thought he was? Because of course, my first instinct, being one of these people who jump to conclusions and rages immediately, I immediately heard as soon as Pam Bondi said that he was like a people smuggler. I thought she's lying. She's made it all up. It's another piece of Trump fakery. But I hadn't read the indictment. So, I mean, you have any thoughts?
So it doesn't shed a lot of light. It accuses him of alien smuggling. There's a conspiracy. There's a substantive count. We understand from the government, from that document and from a detention memo that seeks to keep him behind bars pending the trial. All sorts of accusations beyond those things. We know that chiefly their evidence is potential testimony from co-conspirators. I think the people who are quickly dismissing that as not sufficient have never seen how a federal trial unfolds, don't know the general conviction rate for federal defendants, which is incredibly high, mostly by guilty plea. I think on any indictment of any sort, if you bet against a conviction, you're a bad gambler, putting aside the details of this case. I also think that people are not people who are relying on the idea that it must be manufactured and made up and that evidence must not exist simply because they didn't bring it before, it is not a sign of necessarily a weak case today. Could be a sign of laziness, could be a reflection of that, could be a sign of this person wasn't on their radar. And then, as happens, by the way, often in less bad faith scenarios than this, that they don't really care about the guy. Now he becomes a cause celeb. They had some generalized notion that he was engaged in bad conduct. I don't know if this is true. I'm just making the case. There's some generalized information that his conduct may be criminal. And now the full weight of every investigator who was free is brought to bear on this guy. And you may not like it because of the way it got initiated after an illegal action, but that doesn't mean he's innocent. And that doesn't mean they're not going to easily convict him. They may or may not, we'll see. But the delay in bringing charges against him doesn't have anything to do with it. And by the way, I think some people are also perhaps thinking, well, the jury is going to feel sorry for him because of all this stuff that happened to him and all this bad conduct. None of that's going to be heard by the jury. None of that is relevant to or probative of guilt or innocence. And jurors are going to be screened to make sure they don't know about the whole history of Garcia. So for them, he's going to be like one garden variety defendant like any other, and the proof will stand and fall on its own merits. And generally speaking, people who are charged with this kind of thing get convicted.
Okay, well, that's a very somber place to end.
Yes. But, thank you, Tina.
Thank you so much. It's just been so fun.
It has. Okay, I'm going to turn myself upside down, and then I'm going to go. Thanks, everybody, for joining, especially in the middle of the day.
I'll never call you pointy-headed again.
No, I like it.